Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into a super interactive session based on the Wheel of Knowledge by Dr. Naved Akbar. We're tackling one of the absolute coolest topics in all of biology, genetics. Specifically, we're going to break down Mendel's Law of Inheritance. We're keeping it simple, structured, and using a really fun question and answer format. So if you've already studied the theory, consider this your ultimate revision tool to lock in those concepts. All right, let's just get right into it. Okay, so to kick things off, we've got to talk about the man behind the science, Gregor Mendel. He is universally known as the father of genetics. And honestly, it's pretty wild because he was an Austrian monk who figured all of this out just working in his abbey's garden. Through, these really meticulous breeding experiments on simple pea plants, he discovered exactly how traits get passed down from parents to offspring. And from all that data, he came up with three foundational rules: the law of dominance, the law of segregation, and the law of independent assortment. We're going to break down all three of these today. But instead of just reading you the facts, we're going to test your understanding as we go. Sound good?
So here is our first big question to set the stage. I want you to really think about this for a second. What exactly is inheritance? And out of all the plants in the whole world he could have used, why on earth did Mendel choose pea plants for his experiments?
Well, let's dive into it. Inheritance is just a fundamental process where characteristics or traits are passed from parents to their offspring through genes, like how human eye color or height or hair type is passed down. But Mendel wasn't studying humans, obviously. He went with pea plants, and the reason why is actually brilliant. They have incredibly clear, contrasting traits, like a pea plant is either strictly tall or strictly dwarf. There's no messy in between. Plus, they grow super quickly, produce a ton of offspring, and they can self-pollinate or be cross-pollinated really easily. Basically, they were the absolute perfect test subjects for tracking generations of genetic data.
Makes total sense, right? Okay, let's move on to some core definitions. Question 2. What is an allele? And when we're talking genetics, what exactly makes a trait a dominant trait? Go ahead and lock in your guess.
Let's see how you did. So alleles are simply different alternative forms of the exact same gene. For example, if we have a gene that controls plant height, one allele might be a capital T for tall, and another might be a lowercase t for dwarf. They both control height, but they're slightly different versions of the code. Now, a dominant trait is one that completely expresses itself even if there's only one dominant allele present. So because tall is dominant over dwarf, a plant with two tall alleles, or even a plant with one tall and one dwarf allele, well, they're both going to grow up to be entirely tall plants. The dominant trait just takes over.
Which brings us perfectly to our next challenge. And honestly, these two terms are so easy to mix up. What is the exact difference between a genotype and a phenotype? Just think about the prefixes of those words for a second. So here is the crucial takeaway. Genotype refers to the hidden genetic makeup of the organism. It's the specific alleles it actually carries inside, like capital T or capital T lowercase t. Phenotype, on the flip side, is the observable, physical trait that you can actually see with your own eyes. It's whether the plant physically looks tall or looks dwarf. So just remember, genotype is the hidden code and phenotype is the physical result. Okay, now that we've got the vocabulary locked down, let's escalate this explainer and get into the real mechanics. Here's your next question. What is Mendel's very first law? The law of dominance. Any ideas? If we look at a heterozygous genotype, something pretty cool happens. Even though it might carry a recessive white allele, let's say the purple allele is dominant. Because of that, the purple trait entirely masks the white one, giving us a fully purple phenotype. And that's exactly what the law of dominance states. When you have two different alleles present together, only the dominant allele gets expressed. The recessive one is still there, but it remains completely hidden. So, if you cross a pure tall plant with a pure dwarf plant, all the offspring in that very first generation are going to be tall. The dwarf trait is just quietly hiding in the background. Moving right along to his second law. What is the law of segregation? Think about what the word segregate actually means in a biological context.
Well, the law of segregation tells us that during the formation of sex cells, or gametes like sperm and egg, the two alleles for a single gene actually separate from one another. A parent cell that has both a dominant and a recessive allele will cleanly split apart, and each resulting gamete receives exactly one allele, never both. This is super important because it ensures that gametes remain totally pure for a given trait, meaning an offspring will randomly get exactly one allele from each parent.
You're doing awesome. Let's tackle the third and final law. What is the law of independent assortment? Form your answer in your head.
So things get really interesting when we start handling multiple traits at once. The Law of Independent Assortment states that alleles for different genes get sorted into gametes completely independently of one another. For example, inheriting a specific seed color does absolutely nothing to influence which allele is inherited for seed shape. They just mix and match totally freely. This creates equally likely gamete types, which perfectly explains why offspring can show entirely new combinations of traits that neither parent actually displayed physically. It's like a giant genetic mix and match.
All right, now it's time to apply these laws mathematically. So how do we actually predict the inheritance of a single trait using what's known as a monohybrid cross? This is exactly where the famous Punnett square comes into play. A monohybrid cross studies the inheritance of just one single trait, like crossing two heterozygous parents. If we chart their separated gametes on the top and side of the square, and then combine them, we get this highly predictable mathematical spread. The genotypic ratio is a clean 1 to 2 to 1. That's 1 fully dominant, 2 heterozygous, and 1 fully recessive. But you have to remember the law of dominance here. Because 3 of those boxes contain at least one dominant allele, they are all going to look the exact same physically. And that gives us the classic phenotypic ratio of 3 to 1. That's 3 dominant phenotypes for every single recessive phenotype.
Okay, let's step up the complexity one final time. If a monohybrid cross tracks just one trait, what do you think a dihybrid cross is? Take a wild guess.
Let's see how this builds on everything we've just learned. A dihybrid cross studies 2 traits simultaneously. So for example, tracking both seed shape and seed color at the exact same time. And because of that law of independent assortment we talked about, these traits mix completely randomly. When you cross 2 heterozygous parents for 2 traits, the math expands into a huge 16-square grid, which ends up producing the incredibly famous phenotypic ratio of 9 to 3 to 3 to 1 in that second generation. Pretty cool, right? All right, the moment of truth. It is time for a rapid-fire exam to really test your retention of everything we've just covered today. Question 1. Which trait is expressed in a heterozygous condition? Is it A, recessive, B, dominant, C, both, or D, none? Make your choice.
And the correct answer is B, dominant. Remember, in a heterozygous condition where both alleles are present, that dominant allele takes absolute center stage and perfectly hides the recessive one.
Awesome. On to question 2. Which of Mendel's laws states that alleles separate during gamete formation? Is it A, dominance, B, segregation, or C, independent assortment? Got your answer?
The answer is B, segregation. Just like the word implies, the alleles segregate, or separate, which ensures that sperm and egg cells only ever carry one single copy of an allele.
All right, final quiz question to completely secure your genetic mastery. What does genotype mean? Is it A, appearance, B, genetic makeup, C, environment, or D, mutation? Lock it in.
And the answer is B, genetic makeup. Fantastic job if you got that one right. Genotype is literally the hidden genetic code, the letters themselves. And it's completely distinct from the physical phenotype that we actually see in the real world.
You guys did a great job today. If you answered most of those questions correctly, you've honestly built an incredibly strong understanding of Mendel's laws of inheritance. Just remember the big 3: the law of dominance, the law of segregation, and the law of independent assortment. Keep practicing with questions exactly like these, and complex genetics will become so much easier to visualize. Thank you so much for exploring the Wheel of Knowledge by Dr. Navaid Akbar with us on The Explainer today. I want to leave you with a quick, provocative thought before we go. Isn't it absolutely wild to consider that the vast, beautiful, and totally unpredictable complexity of all living things on Earth is built right on top of just a few simple, predictable mathematical laws? Laws that were first discovered in a tiny garden of peas? Just think about that for a second. We'll see you in the next Explainer.